Three Lives to Live by Anne Lindbergh. Copyright 1992. Chapter 4. Surprise, surprise. Daisy's learning disability cleared up fast. Even writing cursive, she never mixes up her letters anymore. Everybody, meaning Gratkins and the teachers, said that it was thanks to the computer. But somebody, meaning me, happens to know the truth. Daisy couldn't care less about computers. She only uses her laptop to play a home education game called Zappo. It's supposed to teach you touch typing, spelling, and grammar all in one program where you get to be a character called Mr. Spellgood. If you play it right, Mr. Spellgood stores up punctuation marks as ammunition and zaps the enemy. Your mistakes are the enemy. This game is no fun unless you cheat. The way to cheat is to ignore the touch typing part and play with two fingers. Daisy cheats. I hardly ever use the laptop either, for two simple reasons. One, Daisy hardly ever lets me, and two, I'm too busy with the other laptop, the furry four-legged one. He's better company than the rest of my so-called family these days. When I came back from walking laptop yesterday morning, I went to check whether Daisy was ready for school. Getting ready takes forever now that she's a media freak. Her ambition is to dress like anchor women on TV, but her outfits are put together from things she finds in the attic. The results are not what your typical academy girl wears, not what your typical anchor woman wears either. Most days Daisy is late, and most days I don't mind. But yesterday morning I did happen to mind, because it had been nearly a week since I worked on my autobiography. The reason is that last Monday the fourth graders were let loose in the computer room for LAP, which stands for Language Awareness Program. The computers spent the next 2 days in intensive care. Mrs. McGorian got permission for 7B to spend all of yesterday making up for the time lost on our swap projects. I didn't want to miss a single minute. "What's going on in there?" I yelled, banging on Daisy's door. "Bratkins is already out in the car." When Daisy didn't answer, I went in, and I couldn't believe what she was doing. Usually if Daisy is late, it's because she's in tears, trying on every outfit in her closet. This time she was in tears, all right, but it was over Zappo. "What's the matter?" I asked. I leaned over her shoulder and watched Mr. Spellgood zap a dangling participle with an asterisk. While the zapping took place, the computer beeped its shrill computer tune, and Daisy made a repulsive snuffling noise through her nose. "You're winning, aren't you?" I asked. "Not that it really counts unless you use all your fingers." Daisy was using two. She tapped the keys with one forefinger whose nail glowed from a triple coat of hot pink polish, and one forefinger whose nail was bitten to the quick. The other fingers were clenched into a tight fist. "How come you're ready so early?" I asked. Not only was she ready, she looked as if she had put more time than usual into getting that way. She had French braided her hair, a thing she never does on weekdays because it takes so long. She was wearing rhinestone earrings and a matching pin in the shape of a poodle. I had seen the pin and earrings in the attic, but never dreamed of wearing them. The only jewelry I wear is the key to my room on a string around my neck. I've taken to doing that in case I need privacy, now that Daisy has moved in. "Is it National Suck Up to Your Teacher Day or something?" I asked. Because, believe it or not, she was wearing pantyhose, plus the party shoes she had on when she slid out of the laundry chute. The rest of her was less formal. A jean skirt, you're not allowed to wear jeans at Whetstone, a tank top, and the vest from my great-grandfather's wedding suit. "You look great," I said untruthfully. "Can we go now?" Daisy fished a damp wad of Kleenex out of her pocket and blew her nose. While she was blowing, a runaway sentence appeared on the screen and zapped Mr. Spellgood. He shrank rapidly. Then he died and the game was over. I turned it off. "You're going to make me late," I said. Daisy's nose made that repulsive noise again. Suddenly I wished I hadn't eaten breakfast. "What's the matter? Didn't you get your homework done on time?" Her shoulders heaved as she sobbed out her answer. "I'm homesick." For 3 months, Daisy had refused to breathe a word about her home. Was she finally going to open up? Not wanting her to see how curious I was, I began to stroll casually around the room, looking at all her things. You may wonder how Daisy collected so many things in the short time she lived with us. The answer is she brought them down from the attic. Not just clothes, also a gold-framed mirror that was murky with age, some leather-bound books with illustrations, and a bunch of toys, including a Noah's Ark with wooden animals inside. Mind you, none of this stuff was valuable, or it would have been sold long ago. The mirror was cracked, and the books were missing pages. They were pretty cool all the same, and I told Gratkins she should make Daisy share. Gratkins said I was free to forage the attic for myself, but I don't have Daisy's greedy eye for treasure. Now, when I said Daisy was finicky about food, it's nothing to the way she is about her room. I keep my own things mainly on the floor so I know where to find them. Not Daisy. She doesn't even keep her shoes on the floor. Instead, she lines them up on a shelf in her closet, in pairs, as if it would break their little hearts to be apart. And that's not all. Her books are arranged by color, and her Noah's Ark animals are lined up according to height, pointing in the same direction. All the things on her desk have to point in the same direction, too, even the paper clips. If they don't, she can't get to sleep. I hardly slept at all last night, said Daisy. I was about to ask whether a paper clip had stepped out of line, but she looked so upset that I resisted the temptation. Why not? I asked instead. It's noisy here, she said. Noisy? Our big empty house? With Laptop prowling around at night, even the mice have moved away. I don't mean inside, she explained, reading my mind. Inside is quiet as a tomb. Sometimes the quiet wakes me up at night, and I lie there wondering where everybody is. Now wait just a minute, I protested. You can't have it both ways. Either it's too quiet to sleep or it's too noisy to sleep, but not both at once. Her voice rose to a pathetic, wobbly wail. You don't understand. It's so different. Now was my chance. You mean from where you used to live? What's it like where you used to live? A faraway look came into Daisy's eyes. She took a deep breath and calmed down a little as she spoke. Different, that's all. Noisier inside, with people in every room, and house noises. I'm not sure what. Maybe hot water pipes. It was warmer then. You and Gratkins don't keep this place warm enough. Maybe you'd like to pay the oil bill. She ignored my sarcasm. I can't. Anyway, I still like it here, even if it's cold. It's outdoors that bothers me, with all those cars circling around the house. I began to worry. Was Daisy losing her mind? Stop exaggerating. You make it sound like a merry-go-round. Oh, you know what I mean, she said. This place has streets all around it. There's just a scrap of lawn in front and back, and hardly any trees, and the headlights come in my window all night long. Did you used to live in the country? I asked. She sighed. Not exactly, but there was a lot more land, and the neighbors were farther away, and there weren't so many roads or cars. You lived in the country. I was beginning to lose patience with her. Why don't you go back there if you're homesick? Daisy stared at me for a long time. Her face had a funny expression, half wanting to say more, but half suspicious. She remained silent. I moved toward the door. Could we please leave for school? It's time to go. Daisy didn't budge. I got up while it was still dark, she informed me. I didn't know what to do, so I dressed up extra nice. Then I still didn't know what to do, so I played Zappo. I shrugged. What's wrong with that? It doesn't work is what's wrong. Daisy gave her desk a kick, making the computer beep its tune once more, even though I had turned it off. She blew her nose again. It was getting awfully red. Her nose, not the computer. Her eyes were red too, and oddly smudgy. She must have put on makeup, which is against the rules at Whetstone. There was no way she'd leave home if she knew how bad it looked. My chances of getting to school on time were growing slimmer. If I wanted to spend the day writing my autobiography, I'd have to keep her away from the mirror. It does so work, I told her. I saw it working. You're getting pretty good at it, too. This was a lie. Daisy is a real klutz at computers. I know she's smart, so it must be that she's scared of them. As I said, she only uses her laptop to play Zappo. But even at Zappo, she's no good. She's no good at any kind of video game. When we go to the arcade, she forgets to put the quarter in, and she can't figure out why she never wins. Daisy smiled. She reacts fast to flattery. The game works fine, she admitted. It's just the date that's broken, when you turn the computer on. Don't take it personally, I advised her. People break dates all the time. I thought this was pretty funny, but Daisy cried even harder. It says 1943. It got November 11th right, but even though I keep pushing the delete key and typing it over again, it wouldn't say 1993. And I swear I'm not doing it on purpose. It was like a bad joke. Who ever heard of a learning disabled computer? Come to think of it, it was a good joke on Daisy, except it was making me late. Daisy's laptop works differently from the school computers, so I'd better explain. When you turn the school computers on, they flash the date at you. But with Daisy's laptop, you have to type it in before entering a program. This isn't as much of a pain as it sounds because if you don't know the date, you can make one up and the computer will accept it. One thing is certain, it won't tell you you're 50 years off. I'll try when we get back this afternoon, I said. You must be doing something wrong. She looked more hopeful, so I thought maybe I could sweet talk her out to the car. Unfortunately, Gratkins chose that moment to lean on the horn. Daisy hurried to her mirror. This meant my chances of getting to school on time were non-existent, so I gave the laptop my full attention. First I unplugged it and plugged it in again. Then I checked the place where the cord goes into the machine. Everything seemed okay. I switched the power and waited for the screen to light up. Let's see the manual again, I said. Not that I needed it, but I wanted to make sure I got everything right. Any normal person would keep the manual handy to the computer, but not Daisy. The manual is yellow, so it has to go with the yellow books on the shelf, right? The other yellow books are Nancy Drew's, but Daisy has a logic of her own. Let's see now, I murmured, reading the instructions aloud. After completion of the boot procedure, the computer screen will flash a system prompt requesting current date. Before accessing any peripherals. What's a peripheral? Daisy asked. How do you access one anyway? I never understood that part. Never mind, I said. The point is the date. Here's what we want. Type current date in Arabic numerals following window prompts. The screen will respond showing day of the week. Big deal. I never forget the day of the week. It's the day of the month I lose track of. Why can't it just tell you, like the school computers? Because it's more high-tech, said Daisy. Taking my time, I typed 11/11/93. Then I punched enter. The computer beeped a couple of times before the screen came up with Thursday, November 11th, 1993. You were tired, I told Daisy. You said yourself you hardly slept at all, and digital fours are easy to confuse with nines. I didn't believe this for a minute. Daisy was just being klutzy again. But I was nice enough to spare her feelings, so it didn't seem fair for her to turn on me. You think I'm stupid, she said, practically hissing she was so mad, just because you took lessons and I didn't. Well, I know how to work my own computer, and I know there's something wrong with it. Watch this. She pushed me out of the way and started the whole procedure over again. She was mad, all right, but she was careful. I watched her every step of the way, and there wasn't the slightest doubt that she typed 93, not 43. But 43 is what appeared on the screen. See what I mean? Daisy wailed. It's wrong by half a century. I have to admit, it really was bizarre. I made her try a second time, just to be sure, but it happened again. Then I punched in the date myself, and it came out right. I know what, I said. I'll type 11/11/43 and see what happens. What happened was that the computer took offense. It beeped indignantly for 30 seconds before flashing a message at me. The message said, device timeout, illegal parameter, abort, delete, ignore. I wasn't anxious for it to do any of those things to me, so I turned it off. That's when Gratkins walked in. She was jingling her car keys impatiently, but after one look at Daisy's face, she dropped the keys and said, Honey, what's wrong? I took off my jacket and went to the kitchen for a second breakfast. We were already half an hour late. It is totally untrue that I created this incident out of my singularly convoluted imagination, Mrs. Megorian's exact words, in order to come up with an excuse for missing school yesterday. I wanted to go to school yesterday. I didn't have a red nose, did I? I wasn't wearing makeup, was I? I wasn't even wearing hot pink nail polish. I wouldn't be caught dead with it. The one and only thing on my mind that morning was my autobiography. I told Gratkins there was no reason why I shouldn't go to school alone. She and Daisy could stay home and watch the soaps together. I pleaded, and I begged, but I guess I didn't play my cards right because her answer was always no. What we did instead was go on a family picnic to support Daisy during this time of stress, Gratkins' exact words. I admit once I knew there was no hope of school, I looked forward to the picnic. I expected Daisy to break down and explain a few things. I bet the intelligent reader expects it too. It's about time, you're saying to yourself. Garrett is finally going to get some answers. Answers? Garrett, dream on. This is the way our conversation went. Garrett. So start talking, Daisy. Where's this place in the country you're so homesick for? Why did you run away from it? Who are you, anyway? Gratkins. You ask too many questions. Daisy not only refused to talk, she also refused to eat. This is because Gratkins made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. She forgot that Daisy gags if you mix the two together. The only good news is that Daisy made such a fuss about the broken date that Gratkins took her laptop back to Computer Shack to be overhauled. It serves Daisy right. Now she can't even play Zappo. Mrs. McGorian says this ought to be called the Daisy Atkins story. I hate it when Mrs. McGorian tries to be funny. She says I've hardly started on my own life yet. Boy, is that ever true. But what makes her think I have one? Chapter 5. Today is Sunday. No, they haven't started making us go to school on weekends. Not yet. And no, Daisy didn't give in and lend me her computer. She couldn't if she wanted to because it's still in the shop. So how am I writing this? By hand, that's how. On a pad of paper, with a pencil. It feels peculiar. The reason is that I don't want to forget two conversations I had this morning, one with Gratkins and one with Daisy. I figure this way I can copy them into the Whetstone computer tomorrow morning without wasting my time praying for total recall. This morning it snowed. It was already snowing when I woke up, and it kept on snowing for an hour. We got 2 inches. It was the first snow of the season, so it was kind of exciting. The leaves have mostly fallen off their branches. There are just a few yellow ones left, plus the brown ones on the oak trees, which stay longest of all. When the snow landed on them, it looked like powdered sugar sprinkled on a mixture of bran flakes and corn flakes. I was sitting up in bed and looking out the window, wondering if Daisy would gag over a mixture of bran flakes and corn flakes, when in walked Daisy herself, without knocking. Next time knock, I said. Good morning, said Daisy. I stared at her. What was she trying to do, start the day by picking a fight? Didn't you hear me? I asked. Daisy shrugged. Next time I'll knock. Want to take laptop for a walk? I stared even harder. She was dressed for walking all right. Daisy has an outfit planned for each thing she does or might be asked to do. Skateboarding, for instance. Daisy doesn't know how to skateboard and doesn't want to learn. If she changed her mind, however, she plans to wear a pale pink ballet tutu over pink silk tights with her navy cable knit on top. She has a little notebook with lists of what she'd wear for every occasion. Going to the dentist, appearing on a TV talk show, riding a camel. Honest to God, Daisy planned an outfit for riding a camel. The walking outfit consists of her baby blue Nikes, designer jeans, a purple velvet jacket that she found in the attic, and a feather boa. This morning she wore the boa pulled across her forehead and trailing down behind. What's that for? I asked. She said it was a sweatband. This really cracks me up. Daisy is the last person in the world to need a sweatband. Why? Because she doesn't sweat. She doesn't even like walking unless it's the only way to get where she needs to go. Forget it, I told her. I don't want to take laptop for a walk, and you don't either. I do so, she said. You do not, I said. Why not? She asked. Because I know you, and it's just not your style, I told her. Daisy looked at me for a while with a weird, goofy expression on her face. Do you really know me? She asked finally. Of course I do. Would you know me tomorrow? What do you mean? Of course I would. How about next week? How about next year? I groaned. Daisy, what are you getting at? Knock, knock, said Daisy. I fell for it. Who's there? See what I mean? Smiling the tight kind of smile where you practically swallow your lips, Daisy walked out the door. I locked my door behind me before I went down to breakfast. Gratkin saw me do it and asked why. Crowding stifles the spirit, remember? I answered, quoting her own words. When Daisy barges in without knocking, my spirit gets an asthma attack. Gratkin said that people who saw the key around my neck would take me for a latchkey child and think she neglected me. I told her I'd wear it inside my shirt if she'd rather, but it was my personal right to lock Daisy out of my room. She gave me a sour look. You'd lock Daisy out of your life if you could get away with it. I know you. Did she really? After breakfast, I said, and I tried Daisy's joke on her. She was prepared for it, though. When I got to the knock-knock part, she just said, "Why, it's Garrett." "Oh," I said, "did Daisy already try it on you?" Instead of answering, she sighed. "It's an interesting joke. I wonder how well we really do know each other." It seemed like the perfect opportunity for a good heart-to-heart about Daisy. "I know you hate to ask me to ask questions," I said, for starters. "All the same, since I'm letting her be my twin, don't I have a right to know where she came from?" Gratkins had been cleaning the kitchen sink. This is one of the few jobs she won't let me or Daisy do, because she enjoys it so much. Our kitchen sink belongs in a museum. The flat part is made of marble and is perched on a jungle gym of copper pipes. Gratkins must be the only grandmother in the world with the energy to clean it. "Want help?" I offered as usual. "No, thanks," she answered as usual. "I'm having too much fun." Fun? It looks like punishment to me. She doesn't even use normal household products. Instead, she scours it with an old toothbrush and then polishes it with an old sock. The result is magnificent, but in my opinion it's wasted on a sink. Gratkins was at the polishing stage when I asked her my question about Daisy. I could tell she was upset because she picked up the toothbrush and started scouring all over again. "Don't I have a right to know where she came from?" I repeated. Gratkins frowned into the sink. "Daisy came down the laundry chute, if your story is correct." "Oh, come on," I protested. "You know perfectly well what I mean. Where did she come from before that?" Gratkins shrugged. Then she turned the hot water on full blast, rinsed out the sink, and set to work with the sock again. "If you have nothing better to do, you might take a sponge and wipe the fingerprints off the pantry cupboard," she said. "Someone's been poking around in there with dirty hands." I sprinkled some cleanser on a sponge and began to scrub. "Don't wipe off the family yardstick," she warned me. The family yardstick consists of a series of lines and dates on the pantry cupboard door. Gratkins and her 8 brothers and sisters used to get measured there from year to year to mark how they grew. My heights are on there, too, from when I came to live with Gratkins up to now. "I'll be careful," I promised. "If Daisy is my sister, why isn't she on here, too?" It was just a casual remark, but Gratkins took it the wrong way. "Questions, questions. When are you going to stop asking so many questions?" "When I get some honest answers," I said crossly. "If you know something about Daisy, it isn't fair not to tell. And you must know something about her. Otherwise, why would you be spoiling her the way you do?" That got her attention. Gratkins put down the sock and stared at me. "Spoiling her, Garrett? How do you mean?" I had meant to keep cool, but this was too much for me. I'm afraid I started whining like a 4-year-old. I whined about Daisy's new room and all the furniture in it, with special emphasis on the canopy bed. I whined about the Noah's Ark, and you can imagine what I sounded like by the time I got to the laptop computer. Gratkins was so surprised that she started breathing in little gasps. "Honey, I had no idea you felt this way. Not an inkling." I was so close to tears by now that I talked extra fast, while I could still talk at all. "I want to know why she's your favorite," I said. "It's because she's prettier and smarter, isn't it? Don't lie to me." Gratkins did something unexpected. She laughed. As soon as she started laughing, I broke down and cried. "I'm sorry, honey," Gratkins said as she hugged me with wet, soapy arms that smelled of drains and detergent. "I know it doesn't seem funny to you, but I can tell you one thing. Daisy isn't prettier or smarter than you. You're exactly as smart and pretty as each other, and you always will be." "Yeah, sure." I pulled away from her, feeling mistrustful and embarrassed. "If you're going to start telling things, I'd rather you told me where she comes from." After all that fuss, can you guess what Gratkins answered? She looked me straight in the eye and said, "Daisy came down the laundry chute." Chapter 6. I'm in hot water, and all because of a mood. Not the usual kind of mood, mind you, such as when I get out of the wrong side of my non-bunk, non-canopy bed. At Whetstone Academy for Girls, they couldn't care less about that kind of a mood, as long as you keep it to yourself. No, I'm talking about the mood of my autobiography. The professional author, Mrs. McGorian told us on Wednesday, establishes the mood of a piece on page 1. Are you girls aware of the mood you have set in your autobiographies? We all looked at each other. We all scrunched down in our seats. We all kept our mouths shut. Is it upbeat? Mrs. McGorian asked. Is it melancholy? Is it pensive or humorous? Have you created an aura of mystery or romance? Ardith Schaefer raised her hand, so Mrs. McGorian pounced on her and asked her which. But it turned out that Ardith just wanted permission to go to the girls' room. I can always tell when there's extra homework coming on. The teachers start breathing faster to begin with. Then they get this crazed expression on their faces. Mrs. McGorian was doing both things now. It struck me that if one of us didn't come up with a mood pretty soon, we'd have to spend an hour that evening trying to invent one. I raised my hand before I even knew what I was going to say. I'm not too sure about my own mood, I said, looking desperately around at the other girls in 7B. I know what Priscilla Perry's is, though. Priscilla gave me a dirty look, but I ignored it. She didn't need extra homework either, so I figured she should be grateful. It's equestrian, I said. I was really proud of coming up with this word, but Mrs. McGorian just looked pained. Equestrian, Garrett? Kindly explain yourself. I did. Equestrian means having to do with horses. Priscilla Perry is the horsiest person I know. Horsier than horses, even. Of course, I didn't say how she looks like a horse and laughs like a horse. I didn't want to hurt her feelings. Besides, everyone in 7B already knows it. But I passed a note down the row saying that if Priscilla's autobiography ever got published and someone wanted to buy it, unless that someone looked carefully at the photo on the dust jacket, they'd think the author was a horse. Unfortunately, Mrs. McGorian intercepted the note. It wasn't signed, so she glared at all of us except for Priscilla and said, Girls, I'm afraid some of you aren't taking this assignment seriously. Perhaps it would help if you printed out your diskettes. At first I was glad. I'd been dying to see what my autobiography looked like in real book print on paper. But when I found out it was because Mrs. McGorian wanted to take our autobiographies home and read them, I smelled trouble. I'm nowhere near finished, I objected. Mrs. McGorian said, Naturally, Garrett. The story of your life will finish only in the grave. She's wrong, dead wrong, because I plan to come back and haunt her. She not only humiliated me in class the next day, she also put me through a parent-teacher conference that was nearly the undoing of my family, such as it is. Things started out okay. Mrs. McGorian beamed at us when we all trooped into English class. She had a stack of manila folders on her desk, and I could see right away that they were our autobiographies. Girls, I have many, many moods here before me, she announced. I have sad moods, merry moods. Some of you are earnest, some are sentimental, and some are passionate. We all looked around to see who was passionate, but whoever it was wanted to keep it a secret. One thing is obvious, Mrs. McGorian continued. That's the fact that you are all good writers. I could hear an enormous sigh of relief. I was part of it until Mrs. McGorian handed back every folder but one and said, Garrett Atkins, would you like to have a word with me after class, please? Of all the things I'd like to do after English class, having a word with Mrs. McGorian is last on my list. I would rather eat a Whetstone Academy cafeteria lunch composed entirely of crushed cat, for instance. But I wasn't given a choice, not even the choice of conveniently forgetting that I was supposed to stay, because Mrs. McGorian stood by the door as we filed out. Just a moment, Garrett, she said, grabbing my arm. Don't worry, I won't make you late for health and hygiene. Not that you seem to mind on other occasions. I pretended to ignore her sarcastic tone and said, Thank you, Mrs. McGorian. Leading me back to her desk, she picked up my folder. I noticed as she opened it and leafed through the pages that it looked different from when I handed it in. Riddle, what's black and white and red all over? Answer, Garrett Atkins' autobiography. From what I could see, every page of my first 5 chapters had been marked up by Mrs. McGorian's red pencil. My heart thumped as I waited to hear what she would say. Her first comment was that my autobiography was long. I took this as a compliment. I come in and work on it during recess, I told her proudly. This happens to be true, but I should have kept my mouth shut because she asked who gave me permission. I didn't think you had to have permission to work on school assignments, I said. She gave me a lecture on how the computers are Whetstone Academy property, and I shouldn't just borrow one as if it were a soccer ball. I said I hadn't moved it, not 1 inch, and she said I knew perfectly well what she meant. Besides, there was such a thing as carrying a school assignment too far. More than 50 pages, she added, sighing, her martyred teacher sigh. I made a few comments in the margins with my red pencil. I'd like you to take time to read them and make adjustments if you see fit. I took the folder from her, but I couldn't take my eyes off her face. I felt both scared and fascinated, which I guess is how a mouse feels when it meets a snake. What if I don't see fit? This was a reasonable question in my opinion, so I don't see why she got upset. Her nose twitched as she told me that even the professional author has room for improvement, and as for me, I have far, far to go. Some of the grammar may be wrong, I admitted. She shook her head. Your grammar tends to be on the informal side, but it has its charm. No, it's your mood that troubles me. What's wrong with my mood? I asked. It's callous, said Mrs. McGorian. Your attitude toward your sister's learning disability, for example. Amusing, but insensitive. Where, in these pages, are you really thinking about Daisy? I gasped. How inconsistent can a person get? Wait a minute. You told me there was too much about Daisy in here. You said it should be called the Daisy Atkins story. She sighed again. True, but you've put in facts, not feelings. I'd understand if your preoccupation with Daisy came from genuine concern, but I'm afraid it looks more like ghoulish curiosity. And in places you abandon fact altogether and spill over into fiction. Where? I demanded. Show me. Mrs. McGorian frowned. You know perfectly well what I mean, Garrett. I'm speaking of your denial that Daisy is your sister, to say nothing of the myth you invented in which she appears out of a laundry chute. That's no myth, I informed her. It happened. Mrs. McGorian told me not to be cute. She said I was past the age of believing babies came from cabbage plants. When I reminded her that Daisy had been going on 13 at the time, she said not to be impertinent. I could see we weren't getting anywhere. Food smells began drifting into the classroom, and during one silence my stomach growled. Do you intend to continue this foolishness in the face of common sense and logic? Mrs. McGorian asked. I said yes, I did. And it's not foolishness, I added. It's the honest to God truth. Gratkin said so, and twice in chapter 5. Didn't you read that part? She just stared at me with a cold look on her face. So I asked, Are you calling Gratkins a liar? That question led me straight to the headmistress's office. The headmistress was out to lunch, thank goodness, but Mrs. McGorian made me sit there while she got the files for me and Daisy and looked up our telephone number. I would have told you if you'd asked me for it, I said when I saw her dialing. I'm not a liar either. Gratkins was at home. I didn't know if I was sorry or glad when she agreed to come over for a conference. But I had no say in the matter, or in the matter of getting Daisy up from the cafeteria to join us. By now I was hungry. The food smells were driving me out of my mind, which is maybe why I lost my temper. Ordinarily I know better than to sass a teacher, but I'm afraid I called Mrs. McGorian a 5-letter word, and asked what business it was of hers how Daisy came into our family. Her answer nearly made me faint. It seems that while she was looking through the files for our phone number, she also looked for the copy of Daisy's birth certificate that Gratkins was supposed to give the school. There wasn't one. So what? I asked weakly. Do you think it means she wasn't born or something? Don't be rude, Garrett, said Mrs. McGorian. I'm sure it's merely an oversight on the part of your grandmother, who has enough on her hands raising 2 teenage girls. But you see, if Daisy truly turned up out of nowhere, as you pretend, it would be a matter for the police. The police? Suddenly I felt sick. What if the police found out where Daisy came from and took her back there? She's a pain in the neck, but that doesn't mean I wish she'd go home, or to a foster home if she doesn't have a real one. Plus, I don't want my grandmother in jail. Keeping a child who doesn't belong to you may be the same thing as kidnapping, which is a criminal offense. When Gratkins arrived and gave me an inquiring look, I nearly cried. The amazing thing about that conference is the way Daisy backed me up. She told me afterward that she was just playing her cards right. Personally, I think it was ESP. The minute she walked into the office, she sensed there was trouble, and she took sides, my side. "Hi, Garrett," she said. "Why weren't you at lunch?" "You're about to find out," I said. "What was lunch?" "Roadkill," she answered sweetly, and sat down. There was a pause while Mrs. McGorian shot Daisy a suspicious glance. Daisy smiled back, polite and innocent. "What seems to be the problem?" Gradkins asked. I'm not going to waste time telling how Mrs. McGorian said that relations between me and Daisy seemed a little strained, and that the role of the school was to provide us with the name of a good family therapist. During this part, we all squirmed in our chairs. I'll just pass on to the part about Daisy's birth certificate. Mrs. McGorian is a lot different with parents than she is with us kids. It would have been funny if I hadn't been so scared. She put on this sympathetic voice as she explained to Gratkins about our autobiographies. Then she described my myth about the laundry chute. She had my folder with her and read some parts of it out loud. "I know better than to take it seriously, of course," she said. And she was downright apologetic as she asked Gratkins for a copy of Daisy's birth certificate. I watched Gratkins during all this. She seemed more worried than I'd ever seen her before. At the end of Mrs. McGorian's little speech, she turned to look at me. All she said was, "Garrett," only she said it so reproachfully that my name turned into a groan. "I thought it was like a diary," I explained. "I never thought anyone would be snoopy enough to read it." I meant this to embarrass Mrs. McGorian, but she just said, "It was a class assignment, Mrs. Atkins. I suggest you take Garrett's folder home with you and glance through it. Perhaps it will shed some light on the matter." I squirmed some more. Gratkins squirmed too. But what did Daisy do? Daisy opened her eyes really wide and said, "My goodness, I feel terrible. I'm the one who made Garrett tell that story about me." Mrs. McGorian looked surprised and relieved. Gratkins just looked surprised. As for me, I kept my mouth shut. I figured I'd better hear what Daisy had to say before I got us all into any more trouble. "Gratkins gave me the birth certificate to bring to school," Daisy went on, "but I hid it instead." I stared at her. What birth certificate? Could Daisy have had one in her pocket when she came down the laundry chute? Why would she hide it? None of this made sense. Mrs. McGorian stared too. For once she seemed at a loss for words. "Well?" she prompted after a long silence. Daisy lowered her eyes until her lashes brushed against her cheeks. It looked fake but very becoming. "There's something about me I don't like people to know. Something embarrassing." Boy, is Daisy smart. If she thought for a million years she couldn't have come up with a better conversation stopper. Mrs. McGorian actually blushed. She must have a dirty mind. Her voice was pure syrup as she told me that anything I wrote in my autobiography would be confidential. In fact, she would make an exception and let me finish it before showing it to anyone at all, including herself. "On the condition that you're truthful, dear," she said. Then she told Gratkins that a copy of Daisy's birth certificate had to be on file by the beginning of next week, although she promised it would be confidential too. She said Daisy should bring it straight to her. That way Mrs. McGorian would file it so not even the school secretary would get to see it. Gratkins agreed and said the things parents always say when they're in a hurry to get out of teacher conferences. She still seemed worried. Mrs. McGorian finally glanced at her watch. "I'm glad we've been able to clear up this little misunderstanding," she said cheerily. "That's what Whetstone Academy is for, isn't it, girls? And I hope we all feel comfortable with the results." Gradkin stood up, looking dazed. As she moved toward the door, she tried to stuff one of the files into her handbag, which is big, but not that big. I giggled, but Mrs. McGorian didn't think it was funny at all. "No, no, Mrs. Atkins," she cried, bounding after her. "That's Garrett's official file, and it stays right here. It's her folder that I asked you to look through." Gradkins pulled the file out of her bag again, scattering papers everywhere. Then she said that she wasn't interested in reading my autobiography until it was finished. This was a relief to me, but it annoyed Mrs. McGorian, who said that perhaps the three of us should just go home for the rest of the day. I was grateful. I could hardly wait to see Daisy's birth certificate, but Gradkins had other ideas. She told us that the session at Whetstone had been stressful and that we should gather our forces by going for ice cream. I wasn't too enthusiastic about this idea. It takes a lot of willpower to be slim and mature looking, and I have more willpower when I'm not looking at a menu than when I am. But Daisy and Gratkins never worry about their weight, so we drove to an ice cream parlor. "I'll have a single scoop of frozen yogurt, no cone," I said virtuously. "I'll have a banana split with fudge sauce on the side," Daisy said, "and I'd like an extra plate." Did this mean she'd share with me? I decided to give in if she asked. After all, I'd skipped lunch, but it turned out that the extra plate was to keep things separate. And believe me, separating a banana split takes forever. "Give me a break, Daisy," I said. Gratkin said, "Leave your sister alone." First, Daisy put the cherry on the other plate. Then she scooped off the nuts and put them in a tidy little heap, about an inch away from the cherry. She did the same thing for the whipped cream, after which she carefully extracted the banana and wiped it off with her napkin. All that was left on the first plate was the ice cream. "Satisfied?" I asked. Daisy said, "Not yet." She still had to separate the scoop of vanilla from the scoop of chocolate and scrape off the side of each scoop that had rubbed against the other scoop. By the time she was ready to eat, Ratkins had finished her banana split. The waiter was standing by with the check, his eyes bulging. "You know what, Daisy?" I said. "You're a lunatic." Gratkins got really mad. At me, not Daisy. She said something about tolerance for other people's habits, and told me I'd made enough trouble for one day. "Who's making trouble?" I asked. "I'm waiting patiently, aren't I?" So is the waiter, by the way. The waiter said no problem. He left us alone for another half hour, while Daisy ate a bite of ice cream, followed by a spoonful of fudge sauce, followed by one nut, etc. Her spoon moved methodically back and forth among the two plates and the cup of fudge sauce until only the cherry was left. "It all gets mixed together again in your stomach, you know," I reminded her. Daisy sliced the cherry in half. "Take your time," I said. "I happen to have had a particularly stinky day, but don't let that bother you. It happens to have been because of your silly secret, which I have a right to know, but don't let that bother you either. Who am I to complain?" "You're the world's champion complainer, that's who you are," said Gratkins, "but don't let that bother you." She began bringing Daisy up to date on that morning's episode of One Life to Live, but for once Daisy wasn't interested. "I'd like to know yours too," she said. "Know my what?" I asked. "Your secret." Daisy poked her fork into half the cherry. "Like who you are and why you're in my house." "Who I am? Why, I'm in her house." She had some nerve. "You show me your birth certificate and I'll show you mine," I suggested angrily. Daisy confessed that she'd made up the story about the birth certificate to get us out of trouble. "You've been nice to me," she told Gratkins. "Now tell me who you are." Gratkins didn't answer. She just sat there looking worried while Daisy cut that half cherry into 7 tiny pieces, and ate one, and chewed it for an eon. "I think we should go," I said. Daisy said, "I haven't finished eating." She ate 2 more bites of cherry before putting down her fork. "Who are you?" she demanded. "I want to know." Gratkin started to fuss with the check, figuring out the tip and counting coins. Then she looked around the room as if she were in a hurry to get that waiter back again. "I want to know," Daisy repeated in a voice so soft that I could barely hear. It struck me that the conversation was getting heavy. Scary, even. I looked at Gratkins, wondering if she had heard Daisy's question. When I saw her face, I knew she had. "Well?" said Daisy. Gratkins sighed. Then she looked Daisy straight in the eye and said, "I'm you." It was like one of those saloon scenes in westerns where the good guy and the bad guy have it out while everyone else freezes. What did Gratkins mean? What was going on? "Give me a break," I said. They both ignored me. "I was afraid to let you know," Gratkins told Daisy. "I was afraid you wouldn't like me. Like yourself, that is. The self that lives in the future you slid into down that laundry chute in 1943. I stood up so fast that my chair fell over backwards. "Can we go home now?" I asked. "I don't feel well. Can we please go home?" I was desperate, but did anybody listen? Dream on. The waiter reappeared to take the check. Daisy took a brush out of her book bag and brushed her hair, which is a disgusting thing to do in an ice cream parlor. Gratkins blotted her lipstick with a napkin. "First we have to stop by Computer Shack," she said. "They called this morning to say that Daisy's laptop was ready." There's a moral to this chapter. Here it is. What happens when your whole world falls apart? life goes on.